Listening Section 4. In a moment, you are going to hear a talk about stress and its effects. The talk is being given by a psychologist, Dr. Fiona Williams. Before you listen, look at questions 33 to 36. As you listen to the first part of the talk, answer questions 33 to 36.
We're here today to talk a little about stress. That is, mental or emotional stress. It's something we can't entirely avoid, and yet we need to be aware of its effects on us when it builds up to dangerous levels. Stress is quite usual among university students. Of course, you know the more obvious sources of stress. A deadline for an essay or a project, for example, can certainly be a source, especially as the day gets near. Also, the feeling you might have when you have to speak to many people at once. That can bring on stress as well. But there are other, less obvious reasons too. Stress can come when you're listening to a lecture and trying to keep up with the lecturer's words as you take notes. In fact, you might be feeling stress as you're listening to me right now. Another stressful situation for the university student is waiting for results. After you hand in your paper, for example, you have to wait a while before you know how you've done, and that period of time can be very difficult. One more source of stress is burnout, the feeling you get from working too long and too hard at your assignments. Burnout happens on the job and at school especially. It's also important to remember that not all the stress you may be feeling has to do with your studies. In fact, there are plenty more sources of stress in our day-to-day lives. Things to do with family or work, for example.
Now look at questions 37 to 39. One example has been done for you. As the talk continues, answer questions 37 to 39.
But perhaps the most stressful things of all are major life events. When somebody you know dies, that's a big one. Or, more happily, when you're having a baby. That causes a lot of stress too. Now, in 1969, a psychologist by the name of Thomas Holmes came up with what he called a life event stress index. Now, how this stress index works is like this. For every important event in your life, there is a number, a score if you like. The higher the score, the more stressful the event. The highest number is 100, which represents the most stressful experience you can have. Do you understand so far? Now, Holmes divided these events into 3 categories depending on their score. Events scoring under 35 points he called moderately stressful. Events between 35 and 65 he labeled highly stressful. And everything scoring above that was called extremely stressful. Okay, let me read you a few of these so you understand what I'm talking about. Getting married gets a score of 51. That's considered quite stressful, especially when you consider the change this brings to your life. It's not as stressful, though, as when you get a divorce. That's 73. How about when you get pregnant? That's worth 40 points according to the index. When you finish school, you score 26 points. That's exactly the same score, the same stress level, as when your husband or wife leaves his or her job.
Now look at questions 40 to 43. As the talk continues, answer questions 40 to 43.
Let me read you a few more examples from the stress index. If you move to a new house or flat, the score is 20. You get 45 points if you retire. That's 2 points less than if you get fired from your job. On the other hand, if you find yourself arguing with your mother-in-law, the stress rating is 29 points. How about going on a holiday? When you think about it, a vacation can create stress too. It gets 13 points. Now, I'll stop with the scores for a moment. Next, I want to look at what these numbers actually mean. You're supposed to add up the numbers for events that took place within the last 12 months only. The total is supposed to tell us something about how likely we are to get sick, to become ill from the level of stress. How do we know when we are under a lot of stress? There are many signs, but I'll just mention a few. One is communicating less with friends and family, or at work or school. You may not feel like talking to people so much. When the phone rings, you hope it isn't for you. You just don't want to have to deal with other people and their problems. But humans are naturally social animals, and when there is a constant desire to be left alone, there is something wrong, and it's usually a sign of stress. A second indication is feeling less energy when you wouldn't normally feel tired. You may be eating well, or not even studying or working very hard, but you still feel you have very little energy, like you want to sleep all the time. That's probably stress. When we have trouble sleeping, this too usually means the problem is stress. It might take you a long time to fall asleep, or you may wake up in the middle of the night and not be able to fall asleep again. A person like this is more likely to fall asleep while watching television than in bed.
That is the end of section 4. You now have half a minute to check your answers. That is the end of listening test 3. At the end of the real test, you will have 10 minutes to transfer your answers to the listening answer sheet.